You used a term that I have heard of, but I don't think I could define: black pill. So I'm well aware of, taking the red pill, but what do the different pills mean for people that don't follow this stuff as closely?
The different stages of the pill. I think a black pill is typically kind of the confrontation with a very dark truth about kind of an invariant truth of human nature, of nature in general. It's kind of like the darkest shade of red pill, because red pilling is kind of just being a bit kind of being awake to the realities that are kind of uncomfortable. Black pill is, for example, a black pill would be someone. It's used a lot in the incel community, like for people who really don't have any prospects in getting a girlfriend, marrying, or at least they're on that mindset that they can't do that. For them, a black pill would be that looks and height are extremely important and women really care about it, so they're not going to be able to to find a partner because of that, and they're not very attractive. So that would be the black pill, and they have very specific ways to quantify why this is so. The world of inceldom is quite interesting, and I think black pill is kind of associated with that, but it's come into wider culture, and it's just it just means a dark truth, a very dark truth.
How in the world do you know what incel culture is?
It's just like morbid curiosity. I mean, I don't know. I love to Google stuff. I've been like to lurk around weird forums just to see what people think. And I'm not easily rattled, because there are some places that are just like, whoo, there's fumes of misogyny coming over them. So I don't think many women go in there, but I'm like, let's see what this is all about.
Well, we should talk about that community, because I definitely have friends that didn't fit into the hierarchy. They were not great mate choices. They were really good guys. They had very low self-esteem, and oftentimes felt like they couldn't fit into, being an acceptable mate. And you can see why a group like the incels, which for anybody that doesn't know is like the voluntarily celibate, right? So they don't have a choice.
Involuntarily celibate, yeah.
Involuntarily celibate, yeah, that's right. And it's a very unusual community, because what most people don't realize is there are a lot of men out there that have literally no chance of finding a mate. And so it's a part of our society that we are not talking about or addressing, and it's easy to mock them. But you can't have an entire section of your world be disconnected from marriage and sexual tension relief. Weird things happen in society when you do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's kind of accelerated by changes, in online dating, where, physicality and kind of like things that are hard to translate, once you, know someone, are very important now. So, people literally swiping through physical aspects of people. And it's become, I think, probably the top way of meeting someone now in 2020. And it's moving into that direction. So if you have a database that sorts people by attractiveness, selecting your mates, women tend to cluster around the top guys, and men kind of go for a mix, but there's a bottom set of guys that never get picked because they don't qualify for the pretty high standards that women have, both in terms of physics, of your physical appearance, and also in terms of if you're successful, if you look like you have your life together. And it's quite tough. And I think I read recently that the levels of celibacy that exist now are very similar to those in like feudal medieval times. So I think it's like 20 to 25% of men are absolutely, at least, completely celibate, which in previous times would have gone into, being monks, or there was kind of a social role for a man who is either voluntary or involuntarily celibate. Now that's gone, and now they, retreat into online fandoms and video games and things that, just disconnect them even more from society.
Well, there is a historical concept around in international relations around guesstimating when will a culture ultimately go to war. And one of them is called bare branches theory, meaning that when you get enough branches on a family tree that have no hope of growing new branches because they're involuntarily celibate, you end up having huge increases to things like banditry, gangs, groups of people that are social outcasts, so crime goes way up. And so you can actually look at different periods in history and look at when did giant conquests begin. And it oftentimes is in cultures where some men could take more than one wife, and so they would soak up some amount of the available sexual partners, and then those bare branches would become a danger. So eventually you would have to drum up a war to go to fight with an enemy outside of your country. Otherwise, they will decay your country from the inside. And when we were talking earlier about black pills, that's one that seems like a real reality. If we can't solve the incel challenge in the United States or around the Western world, you will have a bare branches problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you see this because a lot of, kind of the violence that's been committed by, people who've kind of been disenfranchised, mass shootings and things like that. A lot of people like that were kind of, being outcast like this. They had no chances of having a mate. They were, kind of confined to the video games section of society. And it's kind of been on a break now, but I see how, it would be possible that that's going to, accelerate and increase in time, because the number of these people is increasing, and also the callousness of society towards them is unchanging. There is no solution for them except for, be yourself, go to the gym. So, I mean, for some of these guys, especially guys who've, been kind of traumatized by being inadequate or awkward early in life, they just don't have, they don't have the bootstraps to just pick themselves up and just like become a social butterfly, because they're already a bit social. They're kind of pre-programmed to be socially awkward, and it is a really hard jump. For some people it's easy. I mean, if you've kind of had a relatively decent time throughout high school and grade school and stuff, you can do the self-help route and just become a little bit better. But if the delta between where you are and where you have to be is that huge, it's almost impossible. And these guys know it, and that's essentially the black pill.
Yeah, I think when we lived in an agrarian society, 1900 in the U.S. at least, 40% of the people, lived and worked on farms. And so you had a geographic region, and if you didn't fit in, the family pretty much pushed you with somebody. But then as people started moving into the city and you start having this incel challenge in our culture, and that delta gets wider and wider, it was the same time that you were talking about, like this self-help thing came along. And really, most of the self-help was about tolerance for yourself. So it started being like, you should accept yourself exactly as you are. And then you have these people being like, yeah, but I don't like what's going on around me. I want something different. And they keep getting patted on the head and saying, oh, you should just accept yourself the way you are, which is why I think people like Jordan Peterson had such a dramatic rise in the global culture, because he was finally coming around being like, these are the things that you can do to get better. But if you don't have somebody that's a positive force, you will have people that come in and take advantage of that lost community as a negative force. They'll use it to their own ends.
Exactly. I mean, this is a perfect breeding ground for all sorts of radicalism. And I mean, to me, I think it's not surprising that Islamic radicalism has taken root in kind of these disenfranchised communities of young men in Europe that, they're not part of mainstream culture. They live in these enclaves, like, at the outskirts of towns. Their prospects aren't that great. Their prospects aren't that great with local women who, just have a tendency to like local men more. The girls in their community are also kind of off limits. There's all sorts of restrictions around sex. And, there comes this millenarian cult where you can be like a soldier of light. Yeah, sign me up. Of course I want to be part of ISIS. It's much more fun than being, someone who's a loser in my own community. And I'm sure there's all sorts of variants of this, for all sorts of other, subgroups. And it's just, we're just, like you said, the naked branches situation. We're just creating a breeding ground and not addressing these problems for all sorts of other nightmares that we can't even imagine now.
Yeah, and that's the speed with which culture is changing is only getting faster. And like our imagination that, hey, the craziness that just happened in 2020, like I find it almost like to be a really obnoxious when people are like, oh, I just can't wait for 2020 to be done because then we can finally get past all this craziness. And it's like, no. The reason we're in this craziness is because it appears to me that we're in a chaotic era. We're in an unstable time when so much change has happened that literally no one can predict what will happen. It's at times like these when you discover those black pills that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, exactly. And, there's so much complexity in the system. And like Nassim Taleb says, there's so much fragility in the system as well, because everything's so interconnected. We saw this, with the idea that the US isn't producing penicillin, like hasn't really been for the last 20 years. And now it's like, oh, it's just, Ricardian, local specialization. Yes, until you have a pandemic and the whole system crashes, or there's so much fragility in everything being tied together, and having so many butterfly effects butterflying at the same time that makes everything completely unpredictable. And little things like this, inceldom could be a huge historical force that no one's even thinking about.
Thanks for checking out this podcast short. If you like this interview, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button and hit that bell so you always get notified about this podcast. And if you're really interested in conversations like this, you may want to consider joining the Articulate Ventures Network. To find out more, go to network.articulate.ventures.